But first, sometimes building a landmark takes more time than you would like. As the saying goes, Rome wasn't built in a day, yet most would agree it was worth the wait. One wonders if that will be the opinion over time about one of London's latest icons, the new Wembley Stadium. All are now hailing it as a great architectural achievement. Besides comfortably seating 90,000 people, the pillars that blighted the views of thousands in the old stadium have vanished, and every seat has an unobstructed view of the pitch. The old Wembley was probably the most famous football stadium in the world. It hosted cup finals between 1923 and 2000, and was, to successive generations, a palace of dreams. It was there in 1966 that English football achieved its greatest achievement so far, winning the World Cup final. The last FA Cup final there was in May 2000, and it was fitting that the final official match was against its World Cup final opponent, Germany. In October that year, England lost its World Cup qualifier to Germany 1-0. As the new millennium grew closer and London's redevelopment continued, it grew likely that a new stadium would be built. The iconic Twin Towers have now been replaced by a 133-metre high arch that can be seen from vantage points all over London. But its construction took much longer to complete than originally planned. For several years, the £750 million redevelopment in northwest London was dogged by a series of problems and cost blowouts. Australian constructor Multiplex was driven to the brink. Crisis point was reached after yet another opening date, January 2006, was missed.
You will see that the stadium, the roof isn't finished, the steelwork's ongoing, publicised issues with drains and industrial relations. There are their issues and they have to sort them, and presumably that's why their timetable to completion is taking longer than it was previously.
More problems occurred in 2006 when on March 20 a 50-ton steel roof girder slipped out of place, forcing the evacuation of the 3,000 site workers. The delay meant all 2006 events, including the FA Cup and England's home matches for its doomed Euro 2008 campaign, were moved to alternative venues. Other events, such as rock concerts by Bon Jovi and the Rolling Stones, had to be moved, ensuring that the English courts would be deciding who was to blame for the delay long after this generation of fans has passed on.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
But finally, good things came to those who waited. By the time then Prime Minister Tony Blair and soccer legend David Beckham set off the fireworks to open the stadium in 2007, many of the construction problems were left behind. A sense of excitement could be felt by those who built the stadium and those who would live out their dreams there. Unlike the original Wembley opening in 1923, where an estimated crowd of 250,000 swarmed into the stadium and onto the pitch, this opening was more low-key. A special opening ceremony was marked by a fly-past of the Red Arrows Royal Air Force display team. But the highlight was local school children, wearing the kits of every team that had played in the cup final. From this humble ceremony, a new Palace of Dreams was opened. Coming up, the world's most famous prison. From 1934 to 1963, Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay was a high-security prison.
Alcatraz. Films and gangster yarns made it the world's best-known jail. It became the escape-proof prison for America's worst criminals.
With the very cold waters acting as a natural isolating barrier, the Rock, as the island was known, was home to some of America's toughest and most infamous criminals. Among those who took up residence there was Scarface Al Capone, Roy Gardner, last of the lone badmen of the Old West, and Alvin Karpus, kidnapper, bank robber and murderer, to name just a few. They each had something in common: long police records and being too tough for other prisons. During the late 1920s and 1930s, the Great Depression and Prohibition contributed to gangsters and other public enemies gaining influence. Existing law enforcement agencies struggled in the face of the sharp rise in serious violence. Alcatraz was at the time thought to be a key element in the battle against organised crime. As you would expect, life was tough. There was a ratio of 1 guard to every 3 prisoners on Alcatraz, as compared to 1 guard for every 12 inmates in other prisons. With the gun galleries at each end of the cell blocks and the 12 inmate counts per day, the guards were able to keep extremely close track on each inmate. Oddly, the average IQ of the Alcatraz inmates was above that of the neighbouring community of San Francisco, and with plenty of time on their hands, many a scheme was hatched. And not all of these notorious criminals took their fate lying down. During its 29 years of operation, the penitentiary claimed no prisoners as ever having successfully escaped. 36 prisoners were involved in 14 attempts, 2 men trying twice. 7 were shot and killed, 2 12-foot wire fences at the island's western end, where steep rock cliffs blocked the view from 2 manned gun towers. It appears that they left the rock on an improvised raft of driftwood. Their freedom was short-lived. Other attempts included the famous mutiny of 1946, as shown on this News Library film. 10 US Marines were used to overcome convicts who held authorities at bay for 4 days before surrendering. 5 were killed, including 2 prison guards, and 2 more prisoners were later executed for their part in the battle. Another 14 were injured. Finally, in 1963, then Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy shut Alcatraz down. The prison was comparatively expensive to run, and its population of over 300 contributed to the bay's pollution problems. But it had to go. With crime on the increase, there weren't enough cells. Farewell, Alcatraz. Since its days as a penitentiary, the island has undergone a major restoration. Alcatraz Island was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1976 and was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1986. Today, the island is a historic site operated by the National Park Service as part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area and is open to tours. Visitors can reach the island by ferry ride from Pier 33 near Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. China's Yangtze River is the world's 3rd longest, behind the Nile and the Amazon. The Yangtze has traditionally been considered a dividing line between North and South China. From its source in Qinghai Province, it flows for over 6,300 kilometres eastward into the East China Sea at Shanghai. 4 of China's 5 main freshwater lakes contribute their waters to the Yangtze River. Traditionally, the upstream part of the Yangtze River refers to the section from Yibing to Yichang. The middle part refers to the section from Yichang to Hukou, where Boyang Lake meets the river. The downstream part is from Hukou to Shanghai. Looking at these recent pictures, it's hard to accept that the river is suffering from major health concerns. The first annual health report on the Yangtze River indicates a river in crisis. Authored by the International World Wildlife Fund and the Yangtze River Water Resources Commission, it shows that 1/10 of the river is critically polluted. Their awareness of the situation is rather weak. One reason is that a lot of information about water quality and pollution has not been made public. If we immediately informed them about the pollutants in the water, they would be very worried. Perhaps the most vulnerable are the Yangtze River's thousands of boat people who are completely dependent on it for food and water. Li Yongfu is a fisherman who shares his boat with his wife, children and grandchildren. The pollution is much worse than it was during the 1960s through to the 1980s. Now there are fewer and fewer fish. We are not really that clear about the situation. We have to purify the water with alum in order to use it for drinking. It can't be drunk without purifying it first. The World Wildlife Fund joint study reported that the river's annual harvest of aquatic products dropped from 427,000 tonnes in the 1950s to about 100,000 tonnes in the 1990s. Tributaries that flow into the Yangtze, like Chao Lake, are contributing to the problem. Rimmed with factories and fields that use chemical fertilisers, it is one of the most polluted places in China. Every spring, fishermen at Chao Lake are required by environmental laws to halt fishing for a few months. During this time, they repair their nets and worry about their livelihood, which they say has dropped over the last 5 years. Ordinary people like us don't understand the situation very well, but we do know that the fish don't taste as good as they used to. It needs a scientific evaluation. We can't do it ourselves. City sewage is also a problem. In Wuhu City, this canal sends the sewage directly into the nearby Yangtze. Tian Jingfa has lived along the canal's banks for decades. He says the city government has made promises to clean it, but so far the canal still is not living up to expectations. When the weather gets hot, the smell is really bad. This wastewater is discharged all day long without stopping. It just keeps going. Awareness of the crisis has spiked due to a series of chemical spills over the last few years, as well as the nation's preparations for a Green Olympics. But while the central government is stepping up efforts to control big industry polluters, provincial and county level officials are still lagging behind in enforcing regulations. China's conservative state media has got in on the action, citing scientists that call the water cancerous and say the damage is largely irreversible. Today, 300 million people across China do not have access to drinkable water. Coming up, one of London's most prestigious streets. Any street that is featured on the Monopoly board has to be one of the world's most famous, if not prestigious, streets. Modern-day Regent Street in central London certainly qualifies. These days, Regent Street is synonymous with shopping, but that was not always the case. When King George III abdicated in 1811, his son became Prince Regent and ruled in his father's place. Dazzled by Napoleon's urban planning of Paris, the Prince commissioned architect John Nash to design a new formal procession way, and so Regent Street was created. Regent Street includes or intersects some of the world's most famous street names, including Piccadilly Circus, Oxford Circus, Upper Regent Street, before intersecting with Langham Place, Cavendish Place and Mortimer Street. Now, prestigious retail brands such as Jaeger and Austin Reed have made Regent Street their base, and it soon became the centre for clothing and fashion retail for the English gentry. Recently in central London, an exhibition called A Mile of Style charted the history of Nash's creation.
Beautiful art gallery is a great place for visitors to be here because of their rich collection in London themes. And of course, the Mile of Style exhibition is a great fun for visitors and shoppers in Regent Street because show them or take them for a long journey through history and shopping.
Like much of London's retail heart, Regent Street is undergoing a major upgrade and redevelopment. A £500 million investment plan is underway. Though it is rather less glamorous than it was in its heyday, its central location and rich history make Regent Street an attractive proposition for new shops. Over 40 have set up on the street in the last year alone. One of those shops is Hamley's Toy Shop, one of the world's largest, which makes it a special place to be at Christmas. It's a London tradition in early November for families to pack into Regent Street for the annual turning on of the spectacular London Christmas light display. Before the lights switch on, though, parents with young children crowd around shop windows where there are dozens of imaginative and elaborate moving toy displays. While children gaze longingly at the toys in the window, parents calculate the cost of fulfilling some of those wishes for Christmas. Recently, it's been Regent Street itself that has been receiving the most elaborate makeovers. Since the turn of the millennium, the Crown Estate has embarked on a major redevelopment program in Regent Street and some of its side streets. This involves replacing some of the smaller shops with larger units. More importantly, from a commercial point of view, many of the early 20th century offices, which typically for that era had many corridors and small individual offices, are being replaced with the open plan accommodation which is now required by tenants. This is being done by completely stripping out the interiors and rebuilding behind retained facades. The largest element of the plan is the reconstruction of the quadrant at the southern end of the street close to Piccadilly Circus. In addition to shops and offices, a 5-star hotel and a small number of flats will be created here. Not that the development is all that interesting to the kids. The climax of each year's light display is the actual turning on of the lights. Whether it's snowing or not, it's always spectacular. It's said that when the lights in Regent Street are turned on, Santa and his helpers in the North Pole know it's time to get cracking on those final gifts. Rome is the eternal city, and the Tiber River its heart. With the city's many architectural features, such as the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel, its central waterway, the Tiber River, has tended to drift into the background. But the river has been close to the hearts of Romans for as long as the city has been occupied, and now, with the tourist numbers ever growing, the river is coming back to something resembling centre stage. The Tiber winds right through the heart of the city, but has for years been more of an environmental problem than a tourist hotspot. But council officials are saying all will change with the launch of a riverboat service, which offers glimpses of Rome's medieval past and the chance to dine while floating down the Tiber at night. The service for tourists and local commuters will have 6 boats running the length of the city. It was funded by a private consortium costing €2.5 million. The consortium is also launching a 5-strong fleet to move commuters up and down the Tiber for just €1. To get the project off the ground, officials hauled 38 tons of tree branches and garbage out of the Tiber, scrubbed kilometres of graffiti off the riverbed walls, and pulled down tent villages in the northern and southern extremes. Less than a year ago, thousands of fish were floating belly up along the Tiber, in one of the worst environmental disasters in recent years. The problem was blamed on secret chemical dumping. The aim of this boat service is to regain something the city has always had, but has never taken the opportunity to experience. This is a river which, through its bridges, crosses hundreds of years of the city's history. There are bridges built by the ancient Romans that are still in perfect use. At the same time, it's an extraordinary opportunity for tourists, but also for Romans who choose to commute via water and not use the roads.
L'acqua e non la strada.
Now, for €10, tourists can drift past Castel Sant'Angelo, the Roman mausoleum converted into a papal fortress during the Middle Ages. gaze on dozens of medieval palazzi lining the river, and sail by the oldest bridge in the city, built in 142 BC. I've been coming to Rome for 10 years, and I've always thought, why isn't there a pleasure boat in Rome? It's a superb idea. It is very moving to see the Castel San Angelo like I have never seen before. And the Ponte Sisto Bridge with the grassy banks around it. The banks are wilder than in Paris and much closer to nature. It is not just the locals who are overcome with admiration for the beautiful city. It is like I am seeing these monuments for the first time. Perhaps it's because you can't see them in this way either from the car or by foot, or maybe it's the peace and tranquility, despite today's excitement. There's a different type of serenity. They seem like different monuments. Very beautiful. With Paris as their model, officials hope some 15% of the 7 million tourists who visit Rome each year will be tempted to come and try the river tours. But unlike Paris, Rome's river runs between high walls built in the 1870s to prevent floods, which block many of the spectacular sights that have made the Eternal City famous.